Our next speaker is from the Irish Independent and another long-standing voice for free speech in Ireland. And sometimes people would say that the mainstream media are usually enemies of this sort of thing in the country, but I'd like to have the opinion of a journalist on this and how it might affect them, the fact that we'd have a hate speech law coming to this country. So please give a round of applause for ODoherty.
Thanks very much for the invitation. Thanks to all of you for showing up on such a cold night. When I look around this room, I'm looking at a bunch of losers. And I'm saying this to you as a fellow loser, because we are losing the battle. We are losing the battle for the right for free expression, for the right to say that 2 + 2 = 4, for the right to say that a man is a man and that a woman is a woman, and that they can do what they want, but they can't make us lie about it. It's interesting that there's two politicians, and I love annoying politicians. It's one of my favourite hobbies. It's why I do free radio at times, just to really get on their nose. But I would love to see somebody come up with something just called as simple as the Common Sense Party. Because common sense ain't so common anymore, and yet you look around at the people in this room, losers, because we still cling to the idea of basic common sense, facts over feelings. There was a time when we were all brought up to believe that facts, objective facts, were more important than feelings. Now we live in a world where we're meant to think that Lizzo is beautiful and Ed Sheeran is talented. And I don't want to live in that world, right? It's just too weird, right? Or where we're meant to believe Meghan Markle when she says, my truth is the truth. It's not the truth, right? But the whole point when they bring this bill in, this is where the chilling bit comes in. Helen McEntee has said that this is in line with best international practice. There is no best international practice when it comes to hate speech laws. And the cynicism of conflating incitement to violence, which we already have laws in the book against, and anybody who incites violence, definitely the cops need to investigate them. I don't think it's outrageous to say that we shouldn't be telling people to batter other people, right? That's, the liberal in me coming out there. But the idea then of saying incitement to hatred and hate speech, nobody has ever come up with a logical or rational definition of what hate speech is. And every argument I've had with lunatics about this has always boiled down to that what they think is hate speech is just speech they hate hearing. They hate hearing uncomfortable truths. They hate hearing things that don't go along with what they've been taught in the liberal madrasas that are now Irish universities. Some of the stories I've heard from journalism colleges would make your hair curl, right? It's all about indoctrination. It's all about control. And with all due respect to the two politicians to my right, very much to my right in some cases, politicians have a need and an urge to control what society thinks. They have a need and an urge to keep us, the little people, in our place. It's not necessarily evil on their part, it's just part of their nature. And when Helen McEntee says that this is a best international practice, I'll go through some best international practice that she wants to bring in. I'm sure a lot of people in this room have heard of Count Duckula. He's a Scottish comedian who trained his girlfriend's dog to do a Nazi salute, right? Wasn't particularly funny, wasn't particularly clever. I've trained my dogs to give me the paw, but I haven't called them a Nazi salute. He was prosecuted for spreading racial hatred and for spreading hate speech. Then, again, to go back to Scotland, and Scotland I'll come back to in a second, because Scotland is what McEntee is looking for. And Scotland is what we should all be terrified about. There was a Celtic fan who, after Captain Tom Moore died, and you might remember he was the old soldier who raised millions during the COVID campaign by walking around his garden or whatever. This idiot went on Twitter and said that he was glad that Tom Moore was dead. Now, it was an obnoxious statement. There's no denying that. It was just really pointless, you know, but I mean, he's a Celtic fan, so you're dealing with a fairly low bar. And yet, the cops called to his house and he was prosecuted. Now, if we're going to start prosecuting everybody who says something stupid on Twitter, which is what Miss McEntee wants, we're going to have to start building more prisons, because there's too many morons out there who are going to be crossing the line in all of this. And the thing is, in a free society, which we like to think we have, but honestly, people, we don't. People have the right to be idiots. So effectively what we're talking about is criminalising egotree. And yet they're trying to dress it up as, like, we got rid of the blasphemy laws at the last referendum. Overwhelmingly so, and thankfully so. And what we're doing now is replacing blasphemy laws by stealth. Because while religion used to be the thing that you couldn't criticise and say that the halibut was good enough for Jesus, you know, now it's gender identity. Now it's race. Now it's just even political beliefs. And what we've seen is this massive row for control of the public narrative. And one of the things that they have managed to do is, and I don't like the phrase cultural Marxists, because I don't think there's a great conspiracy of globalist, you know, Jews, as a lot of people say, trying to organise things. We've entered into a culture of fear. People see what's going on, they don't agree with it, but they don't stand up against it because they know that the pile-on against them will either harm or completely end their career if they're academics or if they're professionals, or if they're students, they will be completely and utterly shunned. And no young person wants to be completely and utterly shunned. But we can see it even, for example, with J.K. Rowling and the idea that she's some sort of violent, transphobic bigot simply for asserting the fact that women are women and women have the right to go into their own space without some cock in a frock basically invading them, right? And yet for that, she is seen as being a really, really hateful person. And now she can afford to take all the criticism. I mean, she's worth about £1 billion and she doesn't really care, so she has the time to get involved in all of this. But yet, the idea that a woman should be absolutely castigated by men who are just essentially, they're just reasserting the patriarchy under a different guise. And now I do think there's a certain irony in the J.K. Rowling thing before we start lionising her. A lot of people might remember that she was quick to lead the pile-on against Kevin Myers, right? So, and Kevin's an old friend of mine. So I did find a certain irony in having to defend her. But the point is, that goes back to the fact that principles are principles. And while she was wrong with Myers, she's right with this. The same with Graham Linehan. And people who say cancel culture doesn't exist. Have a look at Linehan. And again, I've known Linehan since I was a child. We worked in Hot Press together as teenagers. He's not necessarily a particularly nice guy. But he's lost his career, he's lost his marriage, and he's lost absolutely everything. Simply because he asserted, again, biological reality. So what we have in a situation is that the fantasists will be protected by this bill. The absolute fantasists who think that their feelings and their subjective emotions are far more important than something like as unfortunate as reality, while the rest of us who actually still cling on to this ridiculous and apparently outdated notion that reality is reality will be the ones who are prosecuted. I look at this room and I just think of the Japanese soldiers who came down in 1950 thinking that the war was still on. And everybody laughed because we're the only people who still cling to this outdated notion, which is always... Now, I'm all for gay rights. I voted for abortion. I voted for gay marriage. I'm a social liberal. And I'm horrified, absolutely genuinely horrified by how censorious the Irish media has become against expressing ideas that go against the grain. We live in genuinely dangerous times. And people who say that cancel culture doesn't exist, look at Graham Linehan. And funny enough, Graham Norton recently said that cancel culture isn't a real thing, it's just about a culture of consequence. And then he interviewed J.K. Rowling and he was cancelled from a literary festival the next week. Good. You know? So, look, we need to cling to our ideals. I'm sure there's a lot of people in this room, I'm sure we all have a lot of very different opinions, and I'm sure we completely disagree on an awful lot of things. That's called living in a free society. If the one thing we can agree is in freedom, then we need to fight against this. But, folks, the tide is against us. And as a journalist, I've seen the shift in the last 10 years. And it doesn't just horrify me, it terrifies me. But thanks very much anyway.
Thank you, Ian. Sometimes I kind of feel you might be the last man standing when it comes to contrarian voices in the Irish media. You mentioned Kevin Myers there and George Hook, and pretty much any voice which is against the grain in Irish media has been cancelled itself in the last 5 years.